A student once snapped at his teacher, "Oh sure, because you always know best." The teacher didn't flinch. He simply asked, "What were you really trying to say?" The student had no answer, because sarcasm rarely says what we mean. It hides what we fear. The Buddha noticed this long before we had a word for it. He called it the gap between the tongue and the heart. Today, I want to walk you into that gap, because somewhere inside it lives a pain you haven't yet found words for. About 2,500 years ago, in northern India, there was a place called the Deer Park. Deer grazed quietly in the shade of gentle trees. The air smelled of grass and earth. It was close to dusk when the Buddha, newly awakened, walked into that grove. The wind moved low through the branches. Across the clearing he spotted familiar faces. 5 men he had once practiced alongside, years before. But as he drew near, they exchanged glances. No words passed between them. And yet their eyes carried a sentence as clear as any spoken aloud. "This man abandoned the path. He's not worth our time." The trees swayed slowly in the evening air. Still, the Buddha kept walking. Not faster, not slower, just the same unhurried step, as though the ground beneath him had never once been uncertain. And something in that steadiness reached the 5 men before any word did, the way a lamp in a window reaches you, long before you arrive at the door. They did not rush to greet him, but they did not turn away either. They simply stilled, the way animals in a field go quiet when something passes that they cannot quite name. One of them set down what he was holding, and that small gesture, barely a movement at all, was the beginning of everything. These 5 men had been the Buddha's closest companions in asceticism, the harsh, punishing discipline they all believed would lead to awakening. They had fasted together, pushed their bodies to the edge, believed that suffering the flesh was the way through. The Buddha had believed this too, until one day he didn't. He stopped the fasting. He accepted a bowl of rice porridge from a village girl. He sat alone beneath a fig tree. When the 5 men heard this, they felt something close to disgust. He gave up. He became weak. He should be ashamed. They moved to the Deer Park, agreed among themselves to have nothing more to do with him. And then he walked toward them. They made a silent pact. Don't stand, don't greet him, don't offer food. A man who abandoned the path deserves no respect. It was a wordless kind of cruelty, a cold blade made of posture and silence. But something strange happened as he drew closer. One of the 5 stood up. Another quietly moved to fetch water. The agreement they had made, the wall they had built, dissolved without anyone deciding it should. Later, a disciple asked, "Why did you stand? You had agreed not to." The man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't know. I just watched him walking toward us, and I couldn't stay seated." The Buddha sat down among them. He did not defend himself, did not accuse, did not explain. After a long silence he spoke, and what he said became known as the first teaching, the moment the wheel of the Dharma began to turn. There is suffering. Suffering has a cause. Suffering can end, and there is a path to that ending. The 5 listened, skeptical at first. Why should we believe this man who quit? That doubt still smoldered somewhere inside them. But the Buddha wasn't trying to convince anyone. He wasn't arguing or performing. He was simply describing what he had seen, carefully, quietly. One of the 5, a man named Kandana, began to weep as he listened. Softly, without warning. "I understand. I think I understand." The Buddha smiled. "Kandana, you understand." The old texts say, in that moment, light filled the grove. Perhaps that isn't meant as miracle. Perhaps it simply means this: a heart that had been clenched shut for a long time, opened. The Buddha had known they'd tried to ignore him. He'd felt the cold air of their contempt. And yet he returned, no sarcasm, no edge, no quiet retaliation. Why? That's the heart of what we're exploring today. When we imagine someone walking calmly toward people who had agreed, in silence, to humiliate him, we tend to reach for words like forgiveness or compassion, as though he had worked through something difficult and arrived at a noble decision. But perhaps it wasn't like that at all. Perhaps he simply had nothing left to defend, the way a fire that has burned completely through its fuel no longer pulls away from the wind. The very first teaching the Buddha gave at the deer park is woven together with something called right speech. Right speech doesn't mean speaking correctly or politely in a formal sense. It means don't lie. Don't speak behind people's backs. Don't use words that tear. Don't fill the air with words that mean nothing. And one more thing, don't choose words that wound both the person you're speaking to and yourself. That last one is where sarcasm lives. What is sarcasm, exactly? It's a word dressed in calm clothes, but carrying a blade underneath. Oh, sure, if that's what you think. Impressive. You do this every time, don't you? The words themselves don't look like an attack, but the person who hears them feels something sharp land in their chest. Let's pause here for a moment. When sarcasm rises in us, what's actually happening? It isn't cruelty, not really. Sarcasm tends to appear when something we believed should happen, didn't. Someone should have noticed. We should have been appreciated. They shouldn't have said that. When that should goes unmet, anger and hurt rise up. But showing that pain directly feels dangerous. What if we're rejected? What if we look weak? So we wrap the feeling in words. The blade goes inside the packaging. That's sarcasm. And here's what Buddhism would gently point out. The pain isn't coming from the other person failing to meet your expectation. It's coming from holding that expectation as fixed, as the only way things could be. When reality moves differently, the rigidity is what hurts. There's something else worth noticing. When sarcasm leaves your mouth, it passes through you first. Have you felt it? That small heaviness in your chest after the words come out. The way it doesn't quite feel like relief. That sensation is real. It's your own blade passing through your own body on the way out. We sometimes think, I say sarcastic things because of what they did, but the trigger may be theirs. The should that gets triggered, that belongs to you. And it was built from old experiences, old hurts, old moments when things went a certain way, and you learned to brace yourself. It isn't your fixed nature. It's a pattern that formed under certain conditions. The 5 monks turned their backs on the Buddha because they'd fixed a view. A person who leaves the path is worthless. But when he walked toward them, that fixed view quietly dissolved. What was rigid in them wasn't permanent. It only looked that way from inside the moment. Letting go of sarcasm isn't about forcing yourself to feel differently toward someone. It begins with noticing. There's a should here. I can see it now. That noticing, that's where things begin to shift. A monk once said that the moment you can name the should, it's already slightly less in charge of you. Like catching a fish in your hands and feeling it begin to still. You haven't released it yet, but you're no longer being pulled by it without knowing it's there. That small gap between the rising and the speaking is where practice actually lives. Maybe you've been in a moment like this, a meeting. You put forward an idea, it didn't land. A few weeks later, your manager runs with something nearly identical and calls it new. You don't say anything directly. But in the hallway afterward, you hear yourself say, "Oh, that's interesting. I feel like we touched on something similar before, but I guess timing is everything, right?" The words float out. The air in the room cools slightly. No one responds. And you don't feel better. If anything, there's more weight now than before. Where does that weight come from? When the sarcasm left your mouth, what you were actually reaching for was something much simpler. I want to be seen. I want to matter. That's not a shameful need. It's one of the most human things there is. But sarcasm can't carry that message. What arrives is the blade. The need stays behind undelivered. Or consider this, a relationship, long and familiar. Something goes wrong, again, and you hear yourself say, "You always do this." Or, "I knew you would." The other person goes quiet. You don't want to keep going either. What's underneath that exchange? Usually something like, "I want to feel like I matter to you. I want to know you're paying attention." Words that feel too exposed to say directly, so they come out sideways, wrapped in weariness and edge. But the real message never arrives. What the Buddha said in that deer park, "Suffering has a cause," touches exactly this. When sarcasm rises, something underneath is hurting. And if we can trace the hurt back to its root, the words we reach for can change. Parents sometimes do this with children without meaning to. Really? That's what you're going with? I didn't think you could, honestly. These aren't said out of cruelty, they're said from worry. Worry that doesn't know how to speak plainly. Worry that learned somewhere along the way that softness looked like weakness. That belief wasn't chosen. It was absorbed, slowly, from old environments, old relationships, old moments that left a certain shape behind. But absorbed patterns can loosen, conditions change, and responses can change with them. That's the Buddhist view. You are not a person who uses sarcasm. You are someone who, under certain conditions, reaches for sarcasm as a way to cope. The difference is small, but it opens a door not to a better argument, but to a different moment entirely, one where you pause before the words leave, and ask what's actually asking to be said. A monk once described it this way. He noticed he was sharpening his tongue, the way a frightened man sharpens a knife, not because he wanted to cut, but because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. When he finally set the knife down, he said, the room didn't become more dangerous. So what can you do, starting today? The Buddha's teaching on right speech wasn't a rule about changing your words. It was an invitation to pause before the words arrive. Here's something simple you can try. The next time sarcasm rises in you, before you let it out, or even as it's forming, ask yourself one quiet question. What am I actually looking for right now? That's all. You don't need an answer. You don't need to fix anything. Just place the question somewhere in your chest and let it sit there. Do I want to be recognized? Do I want to be understood? Am I hurting? Something may come into focus, even dimly, and that small act of seeing can shift what comes out next. Maybe the sarcasm softens. Maybe nothing comes out at all, and silence feels right. Maybe something more honest finds its way to your lips. This is different from suppressing the sarcasm by force. Pressing things down doesn't make them disappear, it just moves them. Even among the Buddha's earliest followers, there were those who tried to clamp down on their anger, only to find it surfacing somewhere else entirely. The Buddha said to them, it's not about suppression, it's about seeing. Just look at what's inside. That looking is what quiets the words, not willpower. There's one more thing we might try, whenever you're ready. Tonight let one memory come up, a moment when sarcasm slipped out of you, toward someone. You don't need to judge yourself for it. Just gently ask, what was I feeling then? Maybe I was scared. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I felt invisible. When that recognition arrives quietly, something in you may release a little. Not dramatically, just soften, the way a fist slowly opens. This won't transform everything at once. Buddhism doesn't promise that. It promises something more modest, that little by little the way you see things can shift. And when the seeing changes, the words begin to change too. And sometimes that's how it starts, not with a grand resolution, but with one evening, one memory, one quiet moment of recognition that no one else even knows happened. A monk once said that his whole practice began the night he sat alone and finally admitted to himself that he had been unkind to his brother for years, not out of cruelty, but out of envy he had never named. Nothing changed that night except his seeing, and yet everything that came after was different. Think of the last time you wanted to say something and couldn't. You swallowed it, or it came out sideways. What was underneath that word you never said? You don't have to answer now. Just let the question rest somewhere in your chest for a little while. A monk once told me that the things we cannot say are often the things that have been waiting the longest to be heard, not by anyone else, but by ourselves. He had carried one such word for 30 years, he said, and when it finally surfaced, it was quieter than he expected. It didn't arrive as a confession or a cry, but simply as a small, tired thing that had only ever wanted a place to sit down. Maybe that's all we owe the unsaid parts of ourselves. Not resolution, not release, but just a chair pulled out from the table, an invitation to rest. There was a woman in a village outside Chiang Mai who kept a single smooth stone on her windowsill. And when anyone asked about it, she would say only that it reminded her of something she had finally stopped carrying. She never said what the something was, and no one needed to ask. Before we can release cynicism, we first need to learn to see things as they truly are. We explored that quieter foundation in an earlier teaching. You'll find the link waiting in the description below. Go back, for a moment, to that evening in the deer park, 5 men, backs turned, silence as a weapon, a cold wall built from disappointment and pride. And then footsteps approaching. No argument, no lecture, no attempt to win them back. The Buddha simply walked toward them. And something in those 5 men, something that had been locked shut, quietly opened. People who reach for sarcasm are almost always trying to protect something. They don't want to be hurt again. They don't want to look soft. There's something they're not ready to admit. That instinct is understandable. It makes sense. But staying inside that protection is exhausting. Keeping the blade sharp takes everything you have. One quiet pause, one moment of turning inward to ask, what do I actually need right now? Can begin to change the shape of what comes out. The first words the Buddha ever taught were not an attack, not a reassurance, just a truth, spoken plainly. There is suffering, and there is a way out of it. That simplicity opened hearts that had been closed for years. Your words carry that same possibility. Not today necessarily, not in every conversation, but somewhere with someone, the right word, or even a chosen silence, can touch something that's been waiting to be touched. Every word passes through you before it reaches anyone else. What passed through you today? A merchant in the old texts once gave away a handful of rice to a stranger on the road, not because he had abundance, but because in that moment, he remembered what hunger felt like. The stranger said nothing, but 30 years later, the merchant's own son would be fed by that stranger's daughter who had heard the story and carried it like a lamp. Nothing that moves through us disappears entirely. We are not always the giver. Sometimes we are the merchant's son, receiving something we never saw planted. Whose face came to mind while you were listening today? One story a day. In a week, your words will change. In a month, your eyes will change. In a year, the same world will look completely different.